Yes. Right, to receive declaration of interest on procedural rules number 8, item 1, page 5. Grant?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not quite sure whether I need to make a declaration, but there is under
Right,
the...
you don't have to keep that on while you're sitting down if you don't want to.
Okay. There is an item dealing with the Food Innovation Centre and suppliers. Just that the company that I work for is interested in one of the units on the Food Innovation Centre. So, but there is no direct interest for myself. Thank you.
Non-pecuniary.
Non-pecuniary, yeah.
You could stay for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Wonderful. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor King, Councillor Hartley, Councillor Kelly, and Councillor Bullman.
And
Councillor Bullman's substitute is Councillor Adams, who hasn't arrived yet.
Ah, right. Okie dokie. And no other substitutes.
No.
Okay. Conservative group could do your best to get subs here. It'd be wonderful if you could just take that back to your group or whatever. That'd be brilliant. Thank you. Of course, obviously don't mean that for the ones that are here because you're not absent, but you know what I mean. Grant?
Yeah, I had that problem at the last meeting and I couldn't get a substitute to stand in for me. Thank you.
Okay. Well, perhaps the leader can have a look at that. Minutes of meeting held on 30th of November 2021. Item 3, page 7. Matters for accuracy. First of all, are there any matters of accuracy? Everybody hunky-dory? Yeah, going, gone. Matters arising. Any matters arising? Matters arising. Just one from me. I did watch the last ONS meeting on the day and then again last night. I thought it was quite a good meeting. So we've just confirmed that we would obviously not be setting up the reconvene time and task this side of Christmas. So sometime, I guess in the latter half of January, and something like that. Okie dokie. Fine, thanks very much. And the letter in regards to the topic that was sent in by the parish council, I will get that letter done by the end of the week. Send a copy over to Emma as well. Get that sent out, which was raised at the last meeting, and that's in there as well. So get that done by the end of the week. And that's it. Any other matters arising? No. Chairman's announcements? None. Public speaking?
There's no public speaking, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, cabinet reports. So we've got item 12. I'm on page 40. Wherever anybody else is on, please go there. And the excuse me. And the officer amplifying is Simon Fenton. Hi, Simon. Fire away, please. Also, just before you do this, I'll just say that Simon, while he's here and just to help with this COVID situation, officers coming in and out and going, etc. He also has a report to speak to 4 items down, environmental waste. So I've just agreed that as chair that Simon would stay. We'll bring forward item 15. So then Simon goes straight onto that. It just saves moving in and out again. So just remind me when we get there, because I'm still not quite right at the moment, but forget that's what we're doing. Okay. Right. Fire away, please, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. So, the first report covers the proposal for the introduction of an extended food waste service. So the report sets out that under the initial environmental services contract, which was recently approved to extend for a new contract for the delivery of the waste services with Veolia, we did include an option within that for the extension of the food waste service across the whole of the district, as opposed to just the infill to the urban areas for the additional 6,500 houses that will come in October. So the report sets out the rationale for why it would be advantageous to extend the food waste service across the whole of the district in terms of the increase levels of recycling that would be generated, bearing in mind the council's ambition to reach 60% recycling rate by 2025. We do know that as part of the government's proposals around well, it's now the environmental bill, that the proposals to make the collection of weekly food waste mandatory. The act, it's now an act. The bill, it was a bill when we first started to write the paper. It's now an act. So we know that the food waste collection will be coming, but there is no timeline for when that food waste collection will need to be introduced. The budget also did include some funding to pick up the costs that would be generated by local authorities having to extend food waste or introduce food waste services. So there is money within the budget in the 2023-24 year and 25 years of about 300 million one year, 100 million the next year. But again, there is no definitive timetable yet for when the government will make it mandatory for local authorities to introduce the food waste service. The thing to bear in mind as well is that, as it sets out in the report, not only the costs that would obviously be incurred by extending the food waste service in terms of ongoing revenue costs and the one-off capital costs, but there are, in terms of any potential extension, major concerns about the ability to access vehicles. The lead-in times for Veolia, say for example, to procure the vehicles to be able to extend the service from October, which is required. We place the order for those vehicles, and we expect that they will just arrive in time in October. There's about a year's lead-in time for vehicles, which will only get worse, obviously, as the government introduced mandatory food waste. Everybody's got to want vehicles. So at the moment, we are discussing with Veolia the opportunity to either lease vehicles if the decision was made to extend the food waste service across the whole of the district, or to utilise the existing 3 vehicles that they have, which will be replaced by new vehicles in October as part of the contract anyway. So that's they're funded anyway, and then those vehicles could be used as a temporary stopgap until new vehicles could be procured, or the government decide at what point they have to be, the food waste service has to be introduced, and therefore new burdens funding will be available. So the report setting out all the benefits as to why the council should look toward introducing or extending the food waste service across the whole of the district. There are cost implications, and there are potential cost implications in advance of the government new burdens funding. But again, there is no timeline around when that new burdens funding may become available. We have written, or the leader has written, to the Secretary of State for the Environment and Rural Affairs to offer Broadland to become a pilot for the extension of the food waste service, so that the government could use it as a pilot, and the lessons learned could be used for the other authorities which don't have any food waste service at the moment. About 50% of local authorities do, 50% don't, mainly urban areas though, that do currently have it. We haven't actually had a response back, or I'm not aware of a response back from the Secretary of State at the moment, at this particular point in time. So we don't know if they would consider using Broadland as a pilot or not. That's probably all I was going to say on the report. And obviously you've got the 3 recommendations there, bearing in mind that obviously the extension of the service isn't sustainable in the long term in terms of the revenue aspects of it, although bearing in mind as well that the government, through the new burdens funding, will not fund the revenue costs. They will only fund the capital costs of new purchase of new vehicles. So again, the report sets out the recommendation set out the fact that it's not sustainable in the long term. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, John. Just first of all, before opening it up, when you say not sustainable long term, I think councillors hearing that means that sounds like it's not sustainable, therefore it's not sustainable, you end it.
The capital costs of the vehicles, if they were to be purchased from the initial phase, would be purchased from the waste reserve, which has been established following the retendering of the contract, which obviously saved about £500,000. So it's been put in that, but obviously that reserve in the long term needs to be used to replace the vehicles as the contract moves forward. The revenue costs, which would result from the expansion of the food waste service, would have to be borne by the council in the long term anyway, even if the government makes it mandatory, because that's not covered by new burdens funding. So it's the capital costs ultimately that are not sustainable, because obviously that reserve has been set aside to fund other vehicles purchases.
So sustainability, I think, in most people's terms, and any residents that are watching this, if there are any, is about, we have council tax, which then provides the revenue to sustain the service, and the two should not be confused. Yeah, great, thank you. Sue, and then again.
I just wondered whether there had been a cost worked out for collection of the food waste. So if you're saying it's not sustainable, I appreciate there are two things: there's the capital and the revenue. But have you worked out what it would cost per household to continue this without additional funding? No.
Well, no, I'm sorry. So you're entitled to ask that. But what I think I've established here, and I think that there's still some confusion, is this is a political decision. So the political decision is capital. We can have some of that offset by burden relief. We know that from the last meeting we had as well, really clearly. The revenue cost of this, just like refuse collection, revenue cost of this would have to be covered by the council in future. And that's a political decision of this council. Do you fund that from existing council tax and then you deal with that as you move forward? Or do you simply say, well, in actual fact, we don't want this to be coming into our revenue in the future? Now, the clear issue is there's no recommendation here for that not to be the case, is there? No. Right, fine. So,
Yeah, I did understand that. I just wondered whether there was a figure. That was all.
Sorry, the report does set out the figures in there. There's a table in that has a cost summary of how much it would cost. So the contract, when the existing contract was let, the new contract was let, it's £346,000 to extend the service across the whole of the district. That's the revenue cost. But off that, you have to take off. Obviously, there's a disposal cost on that, because obviously we have to pay to dispose of it. But then you have to take recycling credits, which we get back from the county council off that. So we get £125,000 worth of recycling credits back from them. So the table in the report does set out the costs. Not per household, but you could divide that by, there's about 25,000 additional households that we've got to extend the service. Again, the report does say how many households there are it has to be extended to. So you could just divide that figure by the 25,000.
Okay, and then Ken, and I don't know, both of you got your hands up, so I don't know who's first. So I'll go for Caroline and Sue.
Thank you, Chairman. For clarification, please, on page 44, 4.5, it says a known extended time on delivery of the new vehicles there. This would mean a staged rollout of the planned 6,500 in October 22. Now, did I understand you to say that is likely to take place now, or is that still a doubt? And then it goes on to say with a full rollout by April 2023. Are either of those, are we able to go ahead with the October one?
Yeah, just to clarify, the 6,500 households in October is part of the new contract. So that will happen. That's been costed and paid for as part of the new contract. So that's in the existing contract. That was option A in the existing contract. We asked them for an option B, which was the extension of the food waste service across the whole of the district. That's the additional £340,000 cost, which hasn't been agreed yet. and would require Cabinet's approval to be able to introduce that service, which, depending on how quickly we could get the vehicles, it may be able to commence in October 2022, more likely not until January 2023, maybe April 2023, depending on vehicle delivery times.
But the 6,500 for October 22 is on the board. And the funding is subject to the reply to the letter that the leader wrote, is that?
Not for the 6,500. No, that's in
No,
the
not
contract.
for the first one.
That's in the contract.
It's only for the other 30,000.
25,000.
20.
Yes, yeah.
23. Thank you, Chairman.
Caroline, then Sir.
Sorry, I just found out what I wanted to know. It's just if the recycling credits were taken off the annual review, annual costs, and they're on the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say I've been contacted many times by residents within the Aylsham ward to encourage us to take on food waste collection. I think they feel quite excluded, seeing as we don't have it in Aylsham, and would support getting it in place ASAP. Thank you.
So, Jan. Sorry, Jan. Also, what I should have done, through missing me really, was welcome you to the committee as a new member. So welcome. I should have done that actually earlier on, but I'm a little bit under the weather today. So if you can grant me that.
That's fine, and thanks for the welcome. It's just a bit of clarity, please. We've been approached by residents who are being caught in this situation where they're in new developments. So around them there are food waste collections, but they're not being collected. And so, just for clarity, are they likely to be included in the October 2022 rollout as opposed to the later rollout, because they're actually already on an existing round and would like to be included?
I would say yes, but I'd have to definitively know where those new properties were, depending on this capacity on the rounds. But they should, if they're new properties on the existing rounds, be the infill 6,500 properties.
Okay, so it'd be useful to get that clarity. Obviously, it does vary from one development to another. So you've got small developments of 5 houses just across the road from where they're being, food waste is being collected, and it just seems a bit silly not to be able to include. Whereas there are other developments which are much larger.
Yeah, we really need to know the detail, because it's about whether there's capacity on the existing rounds. The infill is the urban areas. The 6,500 effectively is extension of some of the existing rounds and infill. If these additional properties were in the more rural parts, then I couldn't for certain say that yes, they'll be extended into the round if there isn't capacity on that round at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask another one for clarity? As I read it, the food waste collection service will enhance your recycling rates. Okay, so the more food waste collected, the greater your recycling rate. Is that right?
Yep.
So we're actually encouraging food waste.
No,
I mean, it could be seen that way, but yeah, I'd like your take on that.
It's a difficult situation, because what we're doing is we're actually shifting the food waste that currently goes in the residual waste, which is effectively burnt, out of that into recycling. So it does increase the recycling rate, but it is also it can be recycled, so it's used again as opposed to burnt and wasted. So you could argue, yes, it's a perverse thing to try and encourage people to put food waste out. Ultimately, we don't want them to waste food in the first place anyway. But what we want to do is shift it out of the residual waste and put it into the recycling waste.
So on that point, I just wonder if there would be some sort of information campaign around food waste and reducing food waste at the same time, and just to clarify that.
Yeah, we've already got campaigns in the areas that have food waste at the moment to encourage people not to waste food. So yes, and likewise, we also want to encourage people, when they have got food waste, to recycle it as opposed to put it in the residual waste.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify that so there's no confusion. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, okie dokie. Okay, so just to be absolutely clear, Simon, we went through this at, sorry, this has gone through the Environmental Excellence Panel before, it's gone through ONS before with positioning around wanting the food waste contracts to be rolled out to all properties, which does include Alsham, we are pleased to say. So the clear points of these recommendations under 1, 2 and 3 is to indeed roll out over the time period that's talked about to all households. And that is really clear. So we're not being, not clear about that. And then we also have under 2, the finance portfolio holding consultation to agree forward funding capital costs of food waste expansion scheme from the refuse vehicle replacement waste revenue. There's a clear issue here around commitment around budgets and moving that forward. And that covers the principles that we've discussed before and agreed from the various committees and ONS. So I think this is to be welcomed. We have got the legislation paper, if you like, gone through now, just waiting on that money. So whatever happens here, there will be some burden relief. Whatever it is will be helpful. But this is intention to go ahead anyway now and proceed. Correct, Simon?
Yeah, the only thing to draw your attention to is that if the decision was taken to roll in advance of the government giving a definitive date on which it has to be introduced, there is a risk that you would not be able to reclaim the capital costs of the vehicles through the new burdens funding. But the likelihood is that the timelines are such that you're unlikely to probably secure the vehicles in advance of the date that the government say the new burdens funding will be available. There is a risk there. And that's why it says it's, potentially not sustainable, but the timelines have shifted and there are also an opportunity to lease or utilise those existing vehicles that Veolia have anyway.
Yeah. And I can see that in report. That was what I picked up last. I read it. Thought, that's the change here. That's what the trigger is, isn't it? It's that with the vehicles. Got that, Simon. So thank you about that. Bit of clarity is quite important, actually. That's triggered it. So we'll go to the recommendations. To make this simple, we've got all 3 of them, 1, 2 and 3. So I'll move those 1, 2 and 3. I won't read them out. They're quite lengthy. All those agreed? Yes, unanimous. Okie dokie. Thank you. Thank you, Simon. And to move on to the other item for you, Simon. Oh, sorry, Grant.
Sorry. Thanks, Chairman. Just a quick enlightenment for Simon. The development that Councillor Davis was referring to is in Poswick, just off Oaks Lane. There was a development of 12 houses there. Poswick receives its food waste collection, but those 12 houses, new development, don't. And that was a concern at a parish council meeting in Poswick some time ago. So I just thought I'd clarify that for his benefit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Grant. Okie dokie. Right, so next item for you, Simon, is, excuse me, item 15, environmental waste contracting, hydrate and HVO fuel. Page 89.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I'm skimming down the report to find out which page it was on. Right, thank you. Right, so yeah, this report has been through Environmental Excellence Panel, and again, it was part of the negotiations for the new environmental waste contract. Obviously, one of the priorities around that contract was obviously reducing the council's carbon footprint, and one of the aspects of the council's largest contributor to the council's carbon footprint is clearly the diesel that's used by the refuse vehicles, as they only do about 4 miles to the gallon. So we had various discussions with the contractors, the bidders, around whether there were options for electrification of vehicles. Veolia did actually trial an electrical vehicle on the before the tenders went out, and unfortunately that was unable to sustain or deliver the round, because ultimately the technology is not there yet for electric vehicles, particularly outside of urban areas. So the alternative discussions were that the bidders then came forward to suggest that rather than electric vehicles to start with, they could use HVO, hydrogenated vegetable oil fuel, which is effectively a direct replacement for mineral diesel. But it comes from 100% recycled materials, and it's sustainable HVO, so it's not palm oil HVO. So the bidders came forward with that, which would have effectively reduced the CO2 levels by just under 50%. But in further discussions with them, we came up with the proposal that if we funded the additional costs required to use 100% HVO fuel, would they be interested in that as a proposal? And you can see in the report that we came to the decision that if the council set up a pot of up to £50,000 a year to match the additional costs of using 100% HVO fuel, that the bidders were interested in that, and that would effectively reduce the council's carbon footprint through the vehicles by about 98%. With the option, though, because it's a direct replacement, that it wouldn't preclude looking at the electrification of vehicles subsequently as that technology improved. And you can see within the report, again, it shows you the additional costs of using HVO fuel. HVO fuel is more expensive than diesel fuel, about 12% more expensive currently, but it does fluctuate more than normal mineral diesel does. But the actual costs for the first year would be in the order of about £11,700 as opposed to the £50,000. So it's well within that scope. Obviously, over the time of the contract, the costs of HVO fuel and diesel fuel obviously will increase. And so there is a possibility that you would exceed the £50,000 cap possibly in year 8, 9 of the contract. But again, that would be renegotiated with the bidders at that particular point in time, or electrification or electric vehicles would have come in by that point anyway. So that won't be an issue. So again, the report is setting out in various tables in there all of the benefits you can see in terms of massively reducing the carbon footprint of the council through its waste service. It also has other benefits from the other nitrous oxides and other particulate matter that comes out of the vehicles as well, which is obviously set out in the report. So again, I think that's the key aspects of the report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
And then Jen.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a pedantic note. In the recommendation, it says match funding of up to £50,000 per annum to support. When you talk about per annum, is that per financial year, or is that per year of the contract, or is that per calendar year? Just the per annum, just if you can clarify that for me, please. Thank you.
It's the contract years are financial years, so it's per financial year. It now mirrors the financial years.
Yeah.
Just a point of clarification again, para 3.5, the cost of fuel, 117.5 per litre? No, it's, oh, sorry, okay. £117.
No, that's 117.
Yeah.
117 pence.
Yeah,
0.5 per
similarly
litre.
with the HVO fuel. Yeah.
Yeah.
So but that would be accurate if they were, if it was in pence. Yeah, and so the other figures are correct presumably. So that was just a typo. Okay. And I think the other question I've had has been answered through Grant's question. Yeah, that's okay. Thank you.
Okie dokie. Anyone else? Nigel?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, just I think I heard murmurings behind me. I run a diesel car. I can't buy diesel at 1.175. It's now around about 1.48. So that means that the costs have risen already since this report was written. And should we not have a rather more up-to-date prices? And if mineral diesel's gone up by that amount, then presumably HVO will have gone up as well. So we really need clarification.
We can check that with Veolia, but Veolia buy in the hundreds of thousands of litres a month. So they buy at a considerably lower level than we buy, and also fuel duty rebates on the fuel as well. So we can check that, because obviously the report was written before, you're quite right, before the prices went up. But I would expect that they're buying at a much lower cost than we are buying.
So can I have some from them as well? Yeah, I think perhaps we ought to have actual clarification of what they are paying, if we could, Simon, please.
Okie dokie. No one else. So we've got. I just want to ask this question as well. The science behind the CO2 reductions. There's not an offsetting in this. This is literally down to the HVO fuel releases less CO2 directly as an emission rather than an offset.
Yeah, no, it's not an offset. No, it's a direct emission reduction.
So all vehicles really could do with being converted to this one, couldn't they, really?
But we'd all have to eat a lot of chips, I think.
Exactly, yeah. Right. Okie dokie, go on, Grant.
Thanks. Just following up from Councillor Brennan's comments. If the price of 117 pence is actually significantly below what the actual price is now, or what the price is likely to be, my question then is £50,000 sufficient? Because if the costs increase by 25%, should we not increase that 50,000 also by 25% in order to make it more attractive for the contractor to use this type of fuel?
Right, and then I'm going to wrap it up after this.
I think that's part of, as the comment I made, that's the part of the annual negotiations that would happen. If we were reaching near the 50,000 point, then clearly we would want those discussions with the contractor. We're obviously in regular dialogue with them. So yes.
Okie dokie. Right, okie dokie. So we move to the recommendations, which is 94. Page 94. 8.1. Again, rather than read that out, propose that. Second, yes. All in favour? Yes, unanimous. Thank you. Right, thanks very much, Simon. Going back to our original agenda now, item 13, Housing Allocation Policy Review, and Richard Dunshire, Sire, please join us. Oh, and Fran as well. Thank you, Fran. You're always welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair. So,
Sorry, yeah. Page 48. Page 48.
to give everybody the opportunity to get to place. That's it. Lovely. So first of all, thank you very much, Chair. Here today to present to ONS the changes to the allocations policy, which was newly implemented in April 21 this year. So the allocations policy was quite a substantial review. and change to the way in which the team was working. However, I say with great pride how effective it has been in allowing the team to be ready to deal with the market forces which are out there due to COVID. And the reason why I call it market forces is it's not just demand. We're dealing with issues with supply now as well, because for two reasons. One is material. Can't get hold of material at the moment. Anyone who's trying to get building works or anything like that will see the problems in just gaining the material. And if you do get the material, you're paying a premium for that material. Also, labour. You hear in the news all the time at the moment, there is a labour issue at the moment. I hear if you're a plasterer at the moment, you are in substantial demand. Yes. And if you can't move around, if you can't turn around a house, avoid a house, then that property is empty, and therefore someone can't move into it. Void turnaround times at the moment, you normally aim as a landlord for around 20 days to turn around a property. You're looking at around 3 months at the moment. So that's causing substantial issues in getting people into properties. Okay, so what the allocations policy has allowed us to do is prioritise those people who need those properties most. Okay. We currently have 1,460 applicants on our housing register. 752 of those are South Norfolk and 708 are Broadland. They are one housing register, however, they are very much two separate housing registers in the way in which they're allocated properties. So to remind everybody, if you are a Broadland resident, you will get first preference over any Broadland property, and vice versa, so with South Norfolk. Again, going back to the Broadland property, once all Broadland residents have said that they don't want that property, only then will South Norfolk residents have access to that property. Okay. With any policy, whether it's an allocations policy or anything, when you're dealing with customers, you can think you are the most robust, you are putting in the most robust wording possible, and that you have considered every eventuality, put it straight into the real world, and then all of a sudden it's not. It requires being stress tested. So there are quite a lot of changes this year. However, I strongly believe with these changes, I will be back here next year asking for some more tightening, some more issues, but they will be substantially less than the ones in which we're asking for this year. Okay. So part of the reason with the stress tests that we found is because the wording isn't tight enough and there's ambiguity there, it's causing confusion for residents and also shelter. What therefore happens is we get a large number of review requests. If we say we're giving someone band 2, they look at the banding and go, well, hang on, that kind of, if you look at it, I could be band 1, so therefore you challenge. We normally anticipate about 25 reviews per council. At the moment, we're anticipating 100 per council at the moment. Now, a review is no good for anybody. If your management team are dealing with reviews, then that's time that they're not dealing on cases. But it's also not very good for the customer as well, because they feel like they're fighting and they feel like they're not getting anywhere. So to have a clear policy which people can read, people can understand, makes it a lot more effective for everybody involved, because you're essentially managing expectations and people understand where they stand. Okay, the other reason why I said that I would like to be back here in 12 months is the previous allocations policy was left for about a good few years, a good 4 years before I came to review them. I really strongly believe that you should review your allocations policy every 12 months to deal with the market forces that I spoke about before, and to make sure that you're helping your residents the best that they can and keeping up with just good practice. So I do anticipate that we'll be back here again in 12 months. The changes in which I've detailed, we've split them into 3 to make them easily understandable. There are a very small number of core policy changes which will change the way in which we provide social housing to our residents. They're in number 1 within the appendices. After that, you've then just got core policy changes, which require just tightening up of wordings, where the general principles which were agreed in bringing the allocations policy together are very much are very core to our wording. However, we need to reword them to make sure that they're tightened up. The final area is the allocations policy was a really useful document. It was I think it's about 60 odd pages long. It was a useful document in getting the principles across of how, as both sovereign councils want to see their housing system run. But the problem, what we found is it's become a guidance document for officers and residents, as well as an allocations policy. Now, we want to be open and honest with our residents. So we want the guidance to be out there in how we will be applying our allocations policy. However, when you mix it up with the allocations policy, it can cause confusion. So all we want to do is create, rather than having one allocations policy mixed in with the guidance, split those two documents out. So we have the allocations policy and the guidance. That's all we want to do. Both those documents will be fully accessible to the residents, and they will be on the same website. Okay. So I thought the easiest way, rather than going through all the appendices, which of course you will have an opportunity to ask in detail, I just wanted to provide some examples of policy changes. The core policy changes, the first one that we found is we haven't made it clear enough when people deprive themselves of assets. So if you have an asset and therefore you have the ability to manage within the private sector, you can't get access to our housing register. Okay, what we found is people will give money away to their family members to get them below the threshold to allow them to go onto the allocations policy. Now we will then challenge that because there is a limited amount of stock, and therefore we need to make sure that they go to those people who don't have access to that kind of funding. So we just want to make it clear within the allocations policy that can't be permitted. We've also had people give away houses and then come to us and then ask for a social house. We just need to tighten that up. Pardon? Yes, anybody. Yes. Oh, yes. And also we've had it where people haven't even given it to a family member. They've also given it to friends, and we need to make sure that it's anybody. Yeah. I don't want to say that people are doing it, but there is an argument to say that you could just, if you've got 30 grand in the bank, put the 30 grand in your friend's account, come to us, get a social house, and then ask nicely for your friend to give that money back. And you've got that tenancy, and therefore it's a lifelong tenancy, and we can't do anything about it. So we just need to make sure that those kind of things are not happening. Okay, the second one is around wording. What we found, we're struggling with the banding names. Band 1, 2, 3, and 4 really doesn't represent the urgency which you require to go into band 1. Band 1 is there if you're in temporary accommodation, if you're in hospital and you're bed blocking, or you're just in completely inadequate accommodation, and the only reason you're not in TA is because you want to brave it out in the property that you've got right now. It is an urgent situation where you should not be living there, and therefore we need to find an alternative accommodation for you. We look to have very few people in band 1, because if you have too many people, you end up with it causes a saturation down there, and it doesn't allow us to prevent homelessness. We have too many people in band 1 and too many people fighting to get into band 1. We would like to change that to emergency band. So it would be emergency band, band 1, band 2, band 3. That's all, just to really represent what is in that band, to stop the challenges coming our way. Okay. So they're the two examples of the changing and the wording that we want to change. I won't go through the separation of documents. That's the end of my presentation. I invite any questions on the various other allocations policy changes we're hoping to put into place.
Okie dokie. Just for wrapping up, just clarify two things. Under 4.1, I think what you're saying, I'm just clarifying this, you say, I think what you're saying is the two separate policies need to be clearly separated out on the website, and then also the two separate guidance to those policies separated out on the website. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The allocations policy is, whilst it's essentially a mirror image, there is a slight change.
Yeah.
There are 2 allocations policy on the website for you to be able to see. And then under that will be a guidance document. The value of having a guidance document, 2 guidance documents, I don't know whether there is the value there because the guidance will be very similar. It's just how you access the service. So it may end up being 1 guidance document unless I'm advised otherwise.
Okay, can I just clarify this about the guidance document? If the guidance document actually does not also means that if you've got 2 separate policies, that causes more confusion, which it could do.
Yep.
Could do. It's not worded correctly. Then in that situation, it would be defeating the whole point of this exercise in terms of separating out the 2 on the website, if you see what I mean, from the guidance document then. So therefore, could I also ask, because you know, you've said it unless you've told otherwise, so I'm not quite sure who would tell you otherwise. We're talking about Mike here, or we're talking about Fran here as a portfolio holder, or we're talking about God, I don't know. So I don't know who that is, but clearly I'm just pointing out that it would be defeating the purpose of the exercise of the guidance document, also then cause confusion, because so you may well need 2 separate guidance documents, but at the moment you're looking at 1 guidance document, or you're still thinking about it?
Still thinking about when we separate the documents, we always endeavour to make sure it's as clear as possible to customers, because customers access the service in the very same way, whether you're a Broadland resident or a South Norfolk resident. The guidance document could be very similar. However, if there's any kinds of conflict within there where we have to start saying, if you're a South Norfolk resident, do this. If you're a Broadland resident, do this. That can cause even more confusion. So it may be that we just create 2 different documents, and there's that slight change.
Could I ask before we move on? Okay, Fran, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just for clarity, what Richard's trying to say is if there's a political decision by Broadland, which is different from the political decision in South Norfolk, then he would have to give 2 sets of guidance, i.e., like if we agree that we have emergency band 1, 2 and 3, and South Norfolk decide they want to call it a different name, that would be a divergence. So I think that's what we're trying to say there, but hopefully that won't be the case. Thank you.
But I also thought you was talking about something else. I thought you were saying that with the existing situation,
So maybe
there
it's
was
best-
confusion.
No, the only confusion is you've got a 64-page document, which is the allocations policy, and you've got within that document probably 15 pages which is the allocations policy, and that's the real detail. That's where we'll get challenged by shelter. That's where residents can come to us, and that's what makes the monumental difference to residents' lives. Okay, that's hidden in 60-odd pages, and we need to make sure that we pull that out. So the other pages are, how do you go on the housing register? So the guidance is you go on our online form. If you have any issues, then you come to us, you can call us, and we will talk you through that process. And that's just one example. That doesn't matter if you're a Broadland resident or a South Norfolk resident, it's the same online form, so you go through that process. And that's the kind of procedural guidance that we want to be able to put out there.
Yes, it's just not related to, just clarifying this, right? It's not related to moving to this emergency, because I've picked this up from shelter actually myself over the last couple of years, over the last 6 months. There is confusion at Broadland. I've picked this up myself. So this would actually fix that problem. But just picking up on this point, which we could perhaps cover in a minute, James, and that is that I said, are you still thinking about it? So you've still got to work that through. You know, the point I raised about the guidance, we want to separate that out or not. I can quite see it's a pragmatic exercise you've got to go through. We just cover that in a minute. That's been the answer to that, because I do think there's an overview and scrutiny, you know, helpful question on that as well. Just as reflected in a minute, that's you're still going to look at that, because if you're coming back for a review in 6 months' time, again, we might want to have another look at that in 6 months' time to see if what you did there and whether it actually was helpful or not. So I'll end that there. If we can just reflect that in a minute and move to Caroline, Sue, and then Ken.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question about banding. If you had a family who are in rented accommodation which is unsuitable because they have a child in a wheelchair, what banding would they be put into?
That's a $1 million question, because there's so many potential eventualities in there. We would have to, so first of all, are they overcrowded? That's the first one. So if they're overcrowded and therefore need an extra bedroom, or even if they're not overcrowded and they have but that medical need requires that child to have its own bedroom, therefore that would put them immediately into band 3. Once we've done that, because of the overcrowding, once we've assessed that, we would then go to the medical professional to provide us with evidence of the level of need in which they have and the type of property in which they have. And based on that evidence provided by medical professionals, we would then put them in the appropriate band. And you've got in band 3, it's medium medical need. And then you go up to band 2, which is a higher medical need. Then band 1 goes into their bed blocking in hospital. So it would depend on the level of medical need that they provide us. On top of that, we also have a team of OTs which will visit those properties to see the level of need in which that person requires.
So they need medical.
Oh, OT is occupational therapy.
Yeah, I know.
Yep, sorry.
I
Sorry,
know.
I was just good.
Because I've got a resident who's been waiting 2 years, who's got a child in a wheelchair,
Yep.
who can't walk,
Okay.
and they're waiting for a suitable accommodation.
Okay.
So would they not be put on band 1 for that?
It largely depends. So the band 1, but no, it would be more band 2 or band 3. So the level of years depends. The problem we have is we have a lot of demand, like I was talking about, and that we've got about 90 people in band 1, but far too many people in temporary accommodation due to the issues that we're facing both on the supply and demand. It's not the length of time that they're in the property that requires their level of banding, or the length of time of their need. What it is the need at that point. So if the need is growing and medical professionals can detail that need, then they may be pushed up.
Okay.
However, until that point, it depends on. So the advantage of our system is it's choice-based lettings. So parents will have a decision to make, and it's a really, really difficult decision. I would not like to be put in their position, but if they have a medical need to move, there's probably been a property within the district that they can move to. However, it probably won't be in the area that they're hoping for.
Yeah. Okay.
So they have to balance that. Will they want to move to somewhere nearby, or will they want to move further afield and make sure that need is met immediately?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. I'm a bit concerned that the people with an urgent need for adapted property appears to have been removed on the basis of age. I can imagine, I know of people who are very elderly and would need an adapted property without necessarily having medical conditions, especially when they get into their 90s. So that concerns me that appears to be being removed as a reason for needing an adapted property. And on the guidance, when it's written and separated out, will that be produced in different languages? Because I'm aware that there are more people from different nationality backgrounds moving into Broadland at the moment. And also, could you please just tell me again the criteria for temporary accommodation as opposed to being put in the emergency band under the housing scheme? So what are the criteria for temporary accommodation provision? Thank you.
Okay, so 3 questions there. First one is about medical and age, and then second one is languages for the allocations policies, and the first one is criteria for TA and emergency. Okay, so the first one, when there is no, I'm sorry if that's come across, and I would welcome to see that written. Yeah, where can I ask? Sorry, Councillor Warren's asking, where in particular does that come across within the appendices? Because all we're looking at doing is taking out the line of an additional adapted properties, because what normally happens is the high, medium or low medical need normally comes with someone needing some kind of adaptations. So what in the allocations policy at the moment, what we've essentially done is duplicated it. We said there's a medical need and the need for an adaptation. If we have the medium high medical need, which is going to remain in the allocations policy, then the need for adaptation then comes from the proof of medical, and therefore we put it on the system so they can bid on that suitable property. Okay, but the fact that we've got a medical need and adaptation in there causes confusion, and we just want to have it as a medical need, and therefore, as I said, just to repeat, the medical evidence will detail the kind of property they need. And to go back to your, just quickly about if someone who's 90 years old, or not, I mean, we have an abundance of sheltered property within our districts. So their access to 55 over, and there's plenty of properties. Now, like all properties, any residents that are watching this are going to say, well, I've been waiting for that property in that particular scheme for a long, long time. There are some schemes which are significantly more popular than other ones, okay? But there are pretty much always sheltered properties available within the districts if need be. Okay, are you happy with that answer, or do you want to move over to languages?
Sorry, I just think it's something to bear in mind that a very elderly person may not have any medical conditions that can put them. I'm just thinking of other areas where people who are healthy, aging people, are restricted in what they can apply for and what they can do as well. And I didn't want that to apply to this. If they need a home which is adapted due to their age, as opposed to any medical condition. I just wanted to make sure that that wasn't excluding age as a reason.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask where that is in the policy? Which part of the policy you're referring to, just so we can be clear, so that we can look at it? Thank you.
It's in the table on page 55, 4.4.11, housing priority bands. People with an urgent need for an adapted property. You can be in urgent need of an adapted property by virtue of being aged rather than having medical conditions. That's my take on it anyway.
It's medical condition. As far as I know, Fran, I think, and Sue, you might be right, but as far as I know anyway, this is completely medically orientated in terms of adapted properties under those, which I've been involved in a few of the complicated situations around that. But anyway, go ahead.
No, good. If I just say that I know what you're talking about. But for an instance, my wife's great aunt, she was 90 odd years old and living on her own in a second floor flat, and quite happy with that. And a number of older people are, and why shouldn't they be? If that's appropriate for them and they're happy. I think if she'd have had a medical need, then that would have changed things. But obviously, I don't think every old person needs to look to move.
That wasn't what I was saying, Fran.
Sorry. I mean, I get exactly where you're going, and the important word here, medical. If an older person needs to move, and they will need to move for a reason, and whether that's infirm or elderly, and what we'll do, we'll make sure that that's really clarified in the report. But certainly the intention of this isn't to exclude anyone about social care. So I mean, it's a good challenge, and we'll make sure that's worded correctly. But what you're thinking is absolutely the policy we're trying to make. So yeah, we'll ensure that's it.
And just to go back to the sheltered properties, again, we don't want them being void at all. We don't want them sitting there empty. So we want to make sure that people have access to those properties as well. No landlord wants an empty property sat there because they're hard to manage and they're losing revenue, let's face it. So to answer your second question, yes, really good challenge. We'll make sure that we have Intran. So we'll make sure that we have it available. So we'll make sure we do that. The third one, that's a legal question, TA and emergency. Okay, so if someone to get access to temporary accommodation, you have to be what's called in priority need. So you have to be homeless, no access to a property, no access to friends, family. So we will always make sure whether someone's got access to another suitable property to stay in. And then after that, you then look at to see whether they've got a priority need. So if you've got children, for example, you'll fall into a priority need. And that's a legal test. Now, the only thing to answer here is we then have a rough sleeper team within our service. So we were successful in our funding. We're doing another funding round, which we're hopeful for. The only reason we have no rough sleepers is because we do accommodate people, even if they don't have priority need, whereas others aren't able to do so. So when we do that priority need test and they're not accommodated with under that test, if they do go back onto the streets, we will verify them. So we have 2 officers that go out and verify them, and then we provide them accommodation within our rough sleeper accommodation offer. And once they're in there, then we look to work with them very closely to make sure that they're never going to face that issue again. Within the last 2 years, we've helped 100 people who would otherwise be facing on the streets, and another thing that we're very proud of.
Okay, Ken, and then Jan.
Thank you, Chairman. For clarification, it may be in the band here. You mentioned that there was a check. What authority do we have, and how do we check if somebody gives 30,000 to another member of the family, and offer then makes them then eligible?
So, within law, you have to make sure that people have access to public funds. Okay, a social house is a public fund because government money has gone into making that property come to fruition. So we have the legal authority to ask for bank statements and to look at their financial circumstances. Yeah, and we will do so, and then you will find out on that bank statement if at the beginning of the month they had 30 grand and at the end of the month they had 20 pounds. So we always make sure that we ask for that. We also have to look at significant financial resources. So if someone can cope within the private sector by virtue of having if someone's on £50,000 a year, for example, and they can cope within the private sector, we need to make sure that we're reserving the social properties that we have available for someone who is earning nowhere near that. And the only way in which we can normally find out their income is by looking at their bank statements. So whenever someone fills in our online form, they have to attach their last 3 months' bank statements.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of quick points. Appendix 1, you've got a graph showing the increasing number of applications per month. Is this indicative of a longer-term trend?
We're currently doing modelling to see. Now, the demand in which we're seeing, the trend which we're seeing, we anticipated, which is why we put extra staff in place using COVID funding, and they've been absolutely essential. The trend, we're currently going exactly how we anticipated. I will come back with fresh news to see how we're looking over the next 2 to 5 years, because that's the kind of modelling we're doing at present.
So just to follow up on that then, on page 57, under sections requiring updating, section number 3.2 under qualification rules, are we okay with that? Carry on. Yep. You've changed the wording, and I'm just trying to understand the wording. Have a current contract of employment that is effective, as opposed to requires residency. So just wondering what that means. So on page 57, 3.2, the qualification rules, just because we're trying to get to some avoid confusion, I'm not quite sure what that would mean, and whether then that affects the demand as well, the trend. Sorry.
So this has always been within both allocations policies, but specifically it's been important in allocations policy to welcome people who are working within the district into the local area. Now, the main reason we do this is because, especially for people on lower incomes, it's harder it costs more money to then come into a district and travel for your work. So you've got to remember there's different parts of the allocations policy which comes into play here. So if you are working inside the district, but you're earning a very half decent amount of money, therefore you won't be eligible because you're earning too much money. So this is to allow low paid care workers, the people we need to come into the district to live here, so it becomes more financially viable for them to do so and maintain that role.
And sorry, just to follow that up, also the change from permanent to 6 months, because of the nature, there's fewer and fewer permanent contracts around these days. So we need to reflect that in terms of a moving market into the gig economy. So actually a 6 to 12 month contract, particularly for some of our poorer residents, is actually quite a welcome relief. So we need to reflect them, change market.
And just to follow through on that point as well. So somebody who's on very low pay, and that's their qualifying for applying here. What number do they settle into? Is that 2 or 3?
Again, that comes down to their circumstances.
Yeah, but their circumstances, I'm giving you an example, and the circumstances here that they say are a single parent, got 1 child, they're on low pay. What category will they go into? Very simple circumstances.
Yep. So if they're adequately housed, so the place that they're living is suitable.
Yep.
And it's reasonable for them to travel at the distance that they are, they go on band 4. They'd go onto the bottom band, because we have to make sure that those in medium medical go into band 3.
Yep, exactly. Now, band 4, I'm asking a scrutiny question here, so we can look at the realities of housing and how many houses we've got. If you was on band 4, what's the current expectancy to get a house, time-wise?
Again, that depends on how open they are to where they live. Okay, if they ask for a specific area, then it's going to take longer. If they want to live right next to where they work and there isn't a significant supply within that area, then it will take some time. If they are open to where they live within the district, it could be months. It could be a couple. It could be very few, a small number of months. If they are looking at a specific area, it all depends on the supply, whether we're getting any new builds. Unfortunately, if there's any properties coming available because someone's passed away, because that's the kind of situation we're talking about. We have a closed supply, and therefore I can only provide the properties in which we have available to us.
And Chairman, just because I had a query from a member this week actually about an individual who's on band 4 and they want to live in Horsford. And the reality is I went back to that member and said they will still be on that band in 5 years' time, unless they property comes up in Horsford or they're prepared to move, and that's the reality.
Yeah. Thank you. Because there's realities we do need to also hear about in terms of what's going on. Because the amount of social housing that's available, total amount, providers.
So
if you don't know the figure, it'd be great in an email.
We're housing at the moment in Broadland about 35 people a month.
35 people a month.
And we're seeing about 50 people, 55 come onto the housing register.
Thank you. Okay. Far away, Grant.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a follow-up question from Councillor Leggett's question. You say that you would just look at bank statements. I've got 5 bank accounts in this country, and I've got another account abroad. I've also got investments in bonds and things like that. If you were to ask for bank statements, I could selectively give you bank statements. Is there not a more thorough way that you can check what assets an individual has or has access to, rather than just saying, well, we just ask for bank statements, because that defeats the object of my ability to hide my assets. If I wanted to, for example, send all my funds abroad, then I can prove that in this country I don't have sufficient funds. So if you can just reassure me that there isn't that a facility to hide.
Anybody can hide anything that they want to if they're so deemed to do so. We don't just ask for bank statement, we ask for wages as well. So when the wages are reflective on the bank statement and they don't match each other, then we go back and query that issue because the money's going in or if you're looking at a bank statement and there's no regular money coming out, that's not your regular bank statement, that's not your regular bank account. You're not paying for food out of there, you're not paying for petrol. So if there's any issues within that bank statement, then we will always raise it with them. When they apply on the application form, we make it very, very clear and we make them sign under it as well as later on in the document to say that they will disclose all their assets, all their financial income, and if you do not do so, you are gaining tenancy through fraud. So if you were to do, not saying you were, but if you were to do what you were doing, and then you were later found out through some kind of housing benefit claim or universal credit claim, which also come to us, you would face losing that property and the inherited court costs because you've essentially gained that property and that asset through fraud and prosecuted to that extent.
Would you not consider doing something like a credit check, which does list all the various accounts that you are connected to that person?
We could do.
There's a problem with that, though.
Yeah.
There is a problem with that, which I think I'd certainly have as an chair, and that is when you're doing that, you can affect their credit status.
You could do a soft one. I think in all my time, and this is now, sorry to say, 14, 15 years within housing, it's only happened once. People come to us when they're desperate.
Yeah.
And and I say this, that normally when people try and move assets around, they do it quite obviously, and we can find it. I honestly, hand on heart, especially the people in our TA in Band 2, people are coming to us. So if you're in Band 1, you're desperate. If you would not stay in TA if you had a load of money hidden away, you go somewhere else. If you're in Band 2, you're also desperate and you're facing really difficult housing situation. Again, if you had a load of money in the bank, you'd probably sort it out yourself. Then when you get down to Band 3 and Band 4, Band 3 is also reasonably desperate. Band 4 is you're adequately housed. You're willing to wait, and the chances of you obtaining a property within that route, it's going to give us more opportunity to find these assets that you've got, because you're not going to sit there and only use one account for a long period of time, because you could be on Band 4, I'm sorry to say, for over 12 months, 18 months, even longer. So there's more opportunities for us to check whether that bank statement, okay? I think we could do, I believe that our residents are honest and they will only come to us when they really, really need us. And we do adequate checks to make sure if we can wean out those dishonest people. I don't want people to come to us and feel threatened. I want them to make sure that they know that we're there to support them, and we can, but we also need to make sure that we do the adequate checks that we do.
Okey-dokey. All right. And I was actually going to say, it can only be one or two cases in a few years that you've had. Is that correct?
I've had one.
One.
I've had one, and we prosecuted. Sorry, it wasn't at this council; it was another council that I worked at. But we prosecuted them, and I enjoy. Sorry to say, but that's a social house that you've taken off someone of real need, and it was an enjoyable prosecution. I'm sorry to say.
Okie dokie. In the days of criminality, putting the cash under your floorboards, paying for cars and housing cash are over because of money laundering regulations. So that really has affected things when you've got bank accounts anyway.
Everything you have to pay for on card basically now, don't you? COVID's done that, so everything goes.
Well,
to
there's a
your bank
limit to
account.
what you can pay for in cash as well when you go to dealers or whatever. So it's all changed actually. The days of bank robbing, and neighbourhoods I grew up are over. So right, okay. I'm going to wrap this up because we've fallen behind on this. So unless it's critical, is it?
Not critical, but just wondered if we could make sure that we're considering the mental health of the people who people are living with, when that might not be the best situation for those. I have become aware of a case of that.
So again, that's why it's really important that we have medical need as a broad coverage, because then that covers that medical and welfare need. And again, we go to practitioners to ask for evidence of to what extent that's causing hardship on that person, and then we band appropriately based on that medical evidence.
We could also look at funds from the independent living assistance policy, because obviously we support people there with medical health, mental health issues and medical issues too. So there are other areas where we could support that family within that housing potentially. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so move to the recommendations, and really we've got a kind of catch-all sentence here, haven't we, around proposed changes to housing allocation policy, which are identified, if I'm correct, just for accuracy for us, under 4.1. Is that correct? Yep. Okay. You have fleshed out some detail there that's not contained in there, but hopefully the minutes can pick that up as well. So all those in favour, please show. Unanimous, right. Thank you very much. It's just gone 11:30, and I think we probably do need to take a comfort break here and come back in 10 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Unsuitable reserved. So we move on to item 16, because we do have the officer present, which is review environmental enforcement, page 95. Right. Let's see. So 16. Right, Nick Howard. Fire away, please.
Good morning, everyone. This is the event you've all been waiting for on the agenda, the review of environmental enforcement penalties. I'll make it as exciting as possible for you with a bingo call halfway through.
I'm on the edge of my seat, actually.
A number of members have already seen these proposals in various guises. Firstly, we sought policy views before doing a review of the existing enforcement penalties and then leading on to recommendations. And we've done a similar process at Broadland District Council and at South Norfolk Council. So very briefly, the purpose of the report then is to determine the amounts of fixed penalty charges going forwards for our environmental and our antisocial behaviour offences. And as you'll see from the report on page 95 of the Cabinet Agenda, and the appendix starting on page 102, there's quite a range of those fixed penalties. A couple of key points that are probably worth just making, just for full awareness. So recommendations, firstly, Cabinet to agree the setting of fixed penalty charge levels as specified in Appendix 1. And secondly, Cabinet to agree the proceeds of fixed penalty notice charges to be reinvested in respective service areas' revenue expenditure budgets. And I'll explain the reason for that in a moment. The Council, as a regulatory body, carries out enforcement by way of serving fixed penalty notices, and that's for specific offences. This report is to review and update the amounts of those fixed penalties, and in several cases to set those for the first time, and to do so in a way that's conducive to good enforcement outcomes. The types of fixed penalty charge in the report are all with reference to existing legal provisions, and there's a couple of points I probably need to make you aware of. The Council has discretion in many but not all cases to offer an early payment discount, and that is a good incentive for people to cooperate with fixed penalty charges. A couple of points probably worth making, or just referring to you to at paragraphs 2.3 through to 2.7, there are individual legal provisions which are addressed in the formulation of the proposals here. So just to reassure you, there's a range of provisions that have been checked to make sure we are setting these provisions for the right reasons. Paragraph 2.9, the Council's present charge levels and arrangements date from various times. So this is a review, an update to helpfully reflect practical experience, changes in legislation, levels of public concern which have increased about local offending in fly tipping and antisocial behaviour. It's also a good opportunity to take account of a DEFRA review, and that was reported back in 2017 and resulted in some new legislation in 2018. That's referred to at paragraph 2.9 and with reference to a background paper. Perhaps I'm getting close to the end, you'll be glad to know. What we are seeking to do is to ensure that we have fixed penalty notice enforcement that is efficient, timely, decriminalised, and avoids, where possible, people having to endure going through the magistrates' court for a prosecution. And of course, that's more time consuming and expensive for the Council. Now, if a penalty charge is set too low, it may fail to have the desired effect of enforcement. And if it's set too high, then people may choose to take their chances and go to the magistrates' court in the hope of a lower fine in the magistrates' court. So there is a balancing act to be struck here. Certainly, the Environmental Excellence Policy Development Panel gave consideration to the question of should the maximum levels be set because of the level of concern about offending. But again, these things have to be taken in balance in terms of not driving things towards magistrates' court. Chairman, I think I'll draw to a close there that we have seen an increase in environmental offences and antisocial behaviour offences of late. We've seen an increase in enforcement of late. Those levels of enforcement are still relatively low. We don't expect to see a high level of fixed penalty notices, and we do expect to bring you an update to the regulatory enforcement policy, which will include policy arrangements around fixed penalty notices. So you will see there some policy arrangements making sure that we've got the balance right in where they're sat. I should probably stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Just before open this up, could we have, Nick, how many penalty notices you've issued on those three categories? So dog fouling, littering, and fly tipping.
Chairman, I will, while we're considering this item, I'll see if I can retrieve the PowerPoint presentation we last used with the Environmental Excellence Policies Development Panel, and that had a number of recent fixed penalty charges. So I'll see if I can retrieve those while you're answering questions. I haven't got a note of those immediately to hand.
Thank you very much. Sue, Caroline, Ken, and then Jan.
Thanks, Nick. I'm just wondering about fly tipping, which does seem to be something of concern. And I understand that the cost of trying to find out who is doing that fly tipping is high. So would that not give us good reason to try to charge the maximum statutory amount of £400 as a fine, so that we have some funds to actually try to investigate who's doing it and try and prevent repeat fly tipping? Thanks.
To answer Councillor Catchpole's question, fly tipping has the nature of fly tipping varies in size, in harm that it causes. Typically, it takes more to clean up than it does to fly tip. And it costs more to clean up typically than a fixed penalty notice charge would give you. So were we to look at a fixed penalty as a cost recovery, that would be a challenging thing to do. The nature of the fixed penalty is to enforce and to deter future behaviours rather than a reparation, if you like. It's not intended to be a reparation. We don't get to reinvest the costs in a clean-up service, for example. So that would probably be my answer to the question. If we set the levels too high, as I referred to earlier, it's likely that there are members of the public who would choose to go to the magistrates' court, where they could conceivably get a lower fine in the magistrates' court than they would in a fixed penalty charge. And the effect of that would be for people not to cooperate with fixed penalty charge enforcement. And I think that's where the balance needs to be carefully struck. And we've done our best to give you some balanced proposals that we think are about the right amount. They will deter offending as far as we can, but they don't push people towards the magistrates' court unnecessarily. You're right, they won't cover the full clean-up costs, but that's the balance we're striking.
Okay, and I'll just follow on from Sue's point, actually. I was listening recently, 4 days ago. This was an item on Radio 2. And they gave an example of one clean-up, which was £100,000. And that was actually a private person, and somehow they've got to try to cover these costs. But the whole issue about local authority fly tipping was this, and you're right, Nick. I mean, it's not about reclaiming the money for the cost, but it's about deterrent. And one of the key things they were saying that they was picking up from councils around the country was, this is the association, by the way, was that the fixed penalties are not high enough, because when they're set at, say, I don't know, £500, the offender's only too willing to pay for it in terms of the amount of money they're making from the fly tipping. And it's thousands and thousands by not paying what they need to be paying in terms of disposing of it themselves. So the £500 is an easy figure to, if it's £500, it's an easy figure, and they're only too willing to pay it. So could you just cover that sort of converse to that of what Sue said?
Absolutely, and it's something I should have said before. Where the harm caused, or the quantity of fly tipping, or the behaviour of the offender, particularly if it's serious or persistent, where any of those factors mitigates away from fixed penalty notice enforcement, then we will prosecute as a first course of action, and we will not offer a fixed penalty notice at all. So fixed penalty notices have an appropriate place, but not for the more serious and substantial offending. And a large fly tip would typically go away from fixed penalty notice and towards enforcement. So would something that's chemicals, asbestos, or something that's of a public health harm. For example, if someone's been offered a fixed penalty notice before or refuses to cooperate with it, again, we would move straight towards prosecution. So just to reassure you, all of those more substantive offences would sit with a full prosecution.
And just again, perhaps you don't have it here, but again, just following on this point as well, do you have any examples within Broadland or South Norfolk actually, of somebody that's offended on fly tipping, and and they've come back and done it again?
Yes, we do, and we had a case in court this morning. It's now for sentencing, which is adjourned to the 11th of January now. I thought I might have been bringing you news that had been concluded this morning,
Right.
but that will follow in about a month's time. That involves a serial, repeat and persistent fly tipper, and we already have a guilty plea, but I don't want to do injustice to the fact that that's still before the courts. So we'll give you that news shortly. So we are dealing with offenders who have repeatedly transgressed.
Thank you. And it's just a point from openness, because we can just then see the processes being applied, and you're actually engaged in that process to what you were saying you do as policy. So it's a good example, Nick. Thank you. Right. So we've got, yeah.
Thanks. Do you have the resources, or what resources do you have to do the necessary investigations to find out who has done the tipping?
We have limited resources. It's the resources sit within the community protection team. Although recently we've got a temporary benefit of 2 additional antisocial behaviour officers who are rapid response. They'll do patrolling work, and they will go and grab evidence from the scene before it can blow away if we've got evidence of an offender, for example. So we've got between 4 and 6 officers who can investigate these matters. It is across a large area and a large population. However, they're doing a really cracking job at the moment. They're doing thorough investigations. Sometimes there'll be a limit to the resource we have and how far we can go. We haven't stretched that to the limit at the moment. So we've caught offenders in a range of circumstances where you would think it would be challenging to do so. So there are some really good investigations being done by a small number of officers, but our capacity appears to be working well at the moment. And we are hearing from repeat offenders. It is having the messages out there. So we're hearing of repeat offenders who are saying, I hear that you're cracking down. I hear that you've caught so-and-so. So we appear to be having the desired effect.
So additional resource has been helpful, Nick.
Absolutely, additional resource is helpful. The antisocial, we've got some additional COVID support advisors who are augmenting team capacity because they've been very busy with antisocial behaviour peaks this summer. So that's been helpful, and we've got some short-term resources that are coming on in antisocial behaviour, and we'll see how far they can help us to crack this problem.
Brilliant. Okie dokie. Right, Caroline next, and Ken following Caroline.
Hi, Nick. I've got a couple of questions for you. The first one, under fly posting, does that include repeated advertising leaflets being tied to lampposts and stuff like that?
It does. Yes, attaching things to lampposts tends to come under street furniture, under highways offences, and they have powers to deal with them that are more stringent than ours. Okay. So the attaching of signs to lampposts is normally a highways matter, and certainly the investigation and control of that can be along fast-moving roads such as the NNDR or A roads, and so it tends to be highways who deal with those. Fly posting will typically be if someone's advertising a band that's coming up, and it'll be on boarded out windows and things of that nature. So it's that type of fly posting. I'm glad to say we don't have a significant evidence of problem in Broadland or South Norfolk for fly posting as it stands, but we'll keep a firm eye on it. And we wanted to make sure the offence is there and the sanctions there if we need it.
Okay, thank you. The other question is, I can't see any penalty charges for developers who chop down TPO trees when they haven't got permission. Does this come under your enforcement team?
They don't come under my enforcement team, they come under planning enforcement.
Oh, okay.
Because that's complex and the area of planning law is significantly different, we've stuck with environmental and social behaviour offences under the legislation in the regulatory services team.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. May I just say how helpful it was to me that the officer, obviously not reading the whole report, but the officer did refer to the paragraphs, to the key points. It's tremendous help to me, Chairman, because I do find it a job to keep up, although I've tried to read most of it. Thank you very much.
I think, and also you made a valid point for everyone, because I think everybody actually finds it a lot more easier when the officer does that. So perhaps if all officers could pick that up from this meeting, it'd be really helpful. I know the comments like this have been made before. It does help you. It makes for a quicker meeting, quicker subject as well. Then Jan, Martin, Sue.
Okay, thank you very much. Hopefully a quick one. As you said, there's been an increase in these issues, and how much it is related to the cost of recycling has been an issue, of course, as well. And I'm just not aware, actually, of and I'm not sure how much the public are aware of the fixed penalty notices and actually the penalties that can occur. So I'm thinking if somebody goes along to a recycling centre, thinks, oh, I'm not going to pay that, so drive off, and then they tip it just down the road, and whether there are any plans for greater awareness raising of that, especially at recycling centres.
So yes, we plan a campaign of awareness raising around the new charges. There is already awareness raising that's carried out. We carry out comms campaigns every so often. We will publicise individual offences, and we see the public reassurance and positive response that comes from knowing that something's being done about it. With new charges being set, we will ensure that we have a nice campaign so residents can be clear on what's permitted and what isn't permitted. And that's critical to the success. We rely on the broad majority of the public cooperating with legal requirements. In relation to recycling and household waste recycling centres, we do map where fly tipping is. We don't tend to see a lot of fly tipping incidents that are just down the road where someone's gone and been deterred from depositing their waste. We see more of a pattern with people who didn't intend to go anywhere near a household waste recycling centre in the first place. But we are keeping a close eye on that, and we liaise with our county colleagues who manage those centres to see if any of that intelligence suggests we've got offenders coming out, reversing out, and rather than pay a fee, and then just being encouraged to tip. So currently we're not seeing a strong signal that way. We're seeing more of an indication that people are willing to simply to fail to cooperate with legal requirements, knowing full well that what they were doing wasn't right in the first place. If that's a sufficient answer, I've now found my data and I can help the chairman with the earlier answer to the question in terms of current fixed penalties within this calendar year. So in Broadland and South Norfolk, I haven't quite got the opportunity to disaggregate those in front of you. I'm seeing one offence of litter, 2 of fly tipping, 4 of duty of care. That's where someone has a responsibility for their waste as a householder, which is not a documented trail, or as a commercial producer where they should be having a documented trail, and where they've just given the waste away for 20 quid and assumed that it's not their problem anymore. And if it's dumped 500 yards up the road, as it was in one case, it still is their problem, particularly if we can't catch the person who did the fly tipping. 2 offences for a waste producer notice. So this goes back to what I just said, a waste producer who fails to have adequate documentation, and then 1 of a waste carrier who was unlawfully carrying waste, and you are required to have a permit in order to carry waste. So there's quite a range of those things there. On top of those, there are things which, I go back to the point earlier, have gone straight to prosecution, and so they didn't appear in sanctions as fixed penalty notice charges. If I total those up, then I'm getting to 710 across Broadland, South Norfolk.
And what period of time is that, Nick?
These are all dated 2021.
2021, brilliant, thank you. Okie dokie. Right, Martin and Sue H, and I'll wind it up because we're falling behind here. Here.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question on Appendix 1. So you've got in the grey boxes on the right-hand side on pages 102 to 104, where you have the statutory ranges. And I know that you said earlier in the report that you'd discussed at EEP about the charging, but was consideration not looked at as to whether to set it to an amount per the regulation changes? Because obviously every time the regulations change and fee policy changes, this would then have to come back for fee setting. So that would minimise that by doing that, would that?
Can you refer me to an example on Appendix 1?
Sorry, yeah, in, say, the graffiti, the second item down, it says statutory range 150 to 150 with a minimum 50 and default. So if it's in statute, then that must refer to a regulation. Therefore, if the regulation changes and therefore the statute changes.
The regulations will normally refer to a specified level on the standard scale, is the phrase that's normally used between level 1, which is your lowest level of fine, and your level 5, which is the highest level of fixed penalty that you can charge. So the fines that you're seeing there will come somewhere between level 2, 3, 4. So local authorities have a discretion within that range, and there's no specified level at which they should or shouldn't set it. So the legislation doesn't change very often, just for reassurance, but what does change is the court guidance as to what would be a typical range within which fines might be set. And then in some legislation, and you'll see that here, there's a suggestion of a default, or that there is a default provided in legislation. So if this authority didn't take a decision on that fixed penalty notice, then default would be, we would be empowered to charge the default level without the council having to make a decision. So the proposal here sits pretty much in line with what will be suggested in government guidance as a default level.
Okay.
Subject to case law as it's building up in terms of the penalties, etc. Sue.
Thank you. I've answered my question. I found it under the Clean Neighbourhoods and Environment Act. So
Well done, Sue. Thanks very much. Right, we'll wrap this up. So move to the recommendations on page 101, Ken, which is 1 and 2. So I won't read them out. So a bit of time, unless somebody wants me to. No. Okie dokie. So we'll move those 1 and 2. Yeah, thank you. All those in favour? Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Agreed.
7, 8,
Unanimous.
9. But I think we were in favour. That's unanimous, then, Chairman.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks very much. Right, we'll go back to the agenda now. We're skipping around today. It's a review of usable reserves. I think I'm back on the right track now. Rodney, page 82.
Sorry.
It's confusing for me, Sue, as well, actually.
Do apologise, Chair. Sort of thing.
It's
I must
okay,
admit, I was thinking I was coming for the later agenda item rather than this one, so that's why pitiful excuse for why I didn't turn up on time. So apologies for that.
Well, if you didn't know that, Rodney, it's understandable.
So essentially, this is a simple report just coming back to yourselves to saying, actually, these are our usable reserves, just for your information, so you have the opportunity, or Cabinet have the opportunity to make any changes to the usable reserves as they see fit. So very much, we're not proposing to make any significant changes to these. I think there are some issues which could make some changes. So we could make change to the accommodation review or the IT reserve review. But we think at this time it is probably prudent just to wait and perhaps review in future. The two things we do want to ask Cabinet to do is, one is very much just rename the Bridge Maintenance Bure Valley Railway Reserve just to the Bure Valley Railway Reserve, because it's wider than just the bridges. And the second issue is, you may remember we set up a new environmental projects reserve a while back. So very much we're just trying to think what would be the appropriate mechanism in place to actually spend money from this reserve. So it's suggested that actually we agree a delegation to the portfolio holder for environmental excellence and the assistant director for regulatory in order to be able to spend money out of this reserve as and when suitable projects come to fruition. And that was all I was going to say on the matter, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So after, I think what you're saying here, Rodney, just clarity for the committee, is that because the uncertain nature of things as they I've got you wrong, save your arm, moving forward, particularly on the accommodation, etc., that even when the budget's set, you can always come back for a review of that, which is totally legal under the Local Government Act. So I think that's the point you're making now. Grant, you want to come in first?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question about the renaming of the Bure Valley, the bridges to the Bure Valley Reserve. Is there a potential, or is there a possibility that works that may need to be done on the Bure Valley, not the bridges, but that money could be taken that was set aside for the bridge maintenance and repairs being used for other works And as a result, we end up with when we do need to do work on the bridges, that the money is not there because we spent it on something else to do with the Beer Valley. That's just a question. Thank
Yeah,
you.
fair
Rodney.
question, actually, just to make absolutely sure.
You have the right. Reserves can only be used once. So actually, if we were to spend it all on the fence repairs, then actually there'd be nothing left for bridges. But I recall there's been a paper recently on this about the spending on that fences, and the assurance were given that even spending some of this money out of the fences would still leave sufficient money to cover the expected works on the bridges. But bridges are expensive beings to actually keep going, and you never know when actually you'll need to do significant work on a bridge. But at the moment, it's thought that this reserve will be sufficient to cover the likely spend out of this.
Yeah, and the total money in the reserve for BVR, total amount there, Rodney, is just committee.
It's currently £290,000.
290,000. And I think the fence line is coming off my memory now. I don't know if it's in there or not, but I think we certainly talked about less than 200 there, wasn't we?
It was something in that
Yeah.
region. Yes, it was a large amount of money, but
Yeah. But the fence is a one-off.
it is indeed.
And then the reserve here, each year, we keep it.
We keep topping up this reserve.
Keep
Yes.
topping it up. So the fence is a one-off. So I think that covers your point, Grant. Good point. Great. Okie dokie. Anyone else? No. Right. Happy to move to recommendation. It pull us back a bit on time. Right. So, sorry. Page 86, 1, 2, and 3. Again, I'll move it. Be quick. Seconded. So all those in favour? Great, unanimous, wonderful. Thank you, Rodney. Nice, easy one for you today. My agenda's looking like a spider now. Inky footprints all over it. So I think we're on 17 now, aren't we?
Street name.
Yeah, street naming. So item 17, page 105. And who's doing this? Is this yourself, Helen? And right. Stuart, fire away, please.
Thank you, Chair. This report relates to two aspects. One is the introduction of charges in connection with the street naming and numbering service, and the second aspect is an update to the associated street naming and numbering policy. Following consideration of place shaping panel, there's a couple of updates in relation to the policy, which is at Appendix 3, which is on page 111. It's proposed to confirm throughout that document that the reference to parish councils relates to town and parish councils, so that will be referred to throughout that document. It's also proposed to add an additional paragraph, which again is on page 112, which will be a new paragraph 1.5, which states it's recommended parish and town councils consider proposals for street naming in advance of developments commencing, i.e. where local plan allocations, neighbourhood plan allocations or plan applications are approved, and discuss these with developers. There's also a correction to the first bullet point on paragraph 6.1, which is on page 115, which stops partway through that paragraph. So it should say main roads should be numbered so that when travelling away from the centre of the settlement, the additional part is odd numbers are on the left and even numbers on the right. So first, in terms of the proposed introduction of charges, the council can levy charges to recover the costs of the service. In relation to street naming, part of that service is statutory, and we can't recover the costs associated with that part. But the second part, which is discretionary, we can recover charges against that. Over the last 12 months, the council has received 170 applications which relate to naming and numbering. And in relation to the proposed scale of charges, that could have generated an income of 34,000. In relation to the updates to the policy, it's proposed to take the opportunity to update this in terms of the aspects which is proposed to retain from the current policies. It's the details of the legislation used, the role of the council in the naming and numbering of streets and properties,
the engagement with town and parish councils in choosing new street names, the procedure for new street names, naming and numbering conventions, and a specification for new nameplates. The additional elements that we're proposing to introduce is the details of the proposed charges and what they cover, examples of naming conventions, the procedure where renaming or renumbering of a street is needed, and the procedure for naming an unnamed road. That's a recommendation, Chair.
Thank you. Just before Grant comes in, so the charges that are being referred to here are all charges that would be, sorry for the pun, be put at the doorstep of the developer.
Yes, the majority of the charges that are proposed are in relation to new developments. There is also a charge where somebody wishes to rename or readdress their own property, which will be £63.
Which is what? Sorry.
63.
Yeah, good, thank you. Right, Grant.
Thank you, Chairman. I was at the place shaping policy development panel meeting where this was considered, and I was a little concerned about the changes to the property name stroke alias, because those costs are effectively for new developments, and you've got a whole list of those. Whereas I don't know that property developers would be changing the name of the property or putting in an alias. Those are for existing residents. For myself, for example, if I wanted to change the name of my property from a number to a name, I've got to pay a fee. And what I did want to see at that meeting was perhaps that we could have certain exemptions, and that being one of those exemptions, that we wouldn't necessarily have to pay that £63 to just change the property description. The other thing that I notice, and that is that the BDC proposed charges are exactly the same as South Norfolk charges. And it was pointed out by Councillor Catchpole at a previous meeting that the costs to the different councils are not the same. They pay 55% and we pay 45%. So if I look at those two charges and I see if that's recovering the cost to the council, then Broadland residents are subsidising South Norfolk residents or developers for the cost of that. So if those fees are identical, I would have expected South Norfolk's council fees to be 5% higher than what is being put there, and Broadland's to be 5% lower than what is being put there. So that is a comment that I'd like to put to the officers, just to clarify why they have got the costs being recovered identical. Thank you.
Yeah, and Rodney, could you cover that? Just before Rodney does, so at the place shaping committee, you've just raised an issue that you raised subsequent to that final point, which was about you'd hoped place shaping that the £63, basically you want to change your number to a name or whatever, would be exempt. What was the place shaping committee's decision on that? Because I'm not seeing any recommendation from place shaping here.
Yeah, I never made a proposal.
Right. Okay.
It was a point that I raised, right, but that was approved by the place shaping panel.
Right. Thank you for that. Just need to clarify what we, because sometimes I think that we can be here a little bit blind to some of the panel's positioning, and therefore it might be something we want to take into consideration, but you've just clarified it. Thank you. Right, Rodney, would you like to cover this? Because I know this 4550 completely causes confusion amongst what we're doing quite often.
Right, so The idea of the 45-55 split is very much that that should be reflective of the amount of work. So actually, if there was 100 applications, you'd almost expect there to be 45 in Broadland and 55 in South Norfolk to reflect the different size of the districts. Therefore, when you're doing the cost share, it also goes 45-55. So when you do the maths, it should be the same cost covering the same amount of applications. So it is right that we have the same charge for each authority, because actually it should still be the same officer time doing an application. It doesn't make any difference which authority it's doing. Obviously, there will be some variations, because actually in some years, South Norfolk might get 46 and Broadland might get 46 and South Norfolk might get sort of a different number. But actually, on balance, it should be the cost of the activity, and the cost per activity is the same. Perhaps we need to take that offline and work through the maths.
I understood that when you worked out the cost to the council for doing this work, that is what we were being presented with. That we were in fact recovering our costs, and that's why we were imposing this charge, because previously, what were the charges before?
So in terms of the current charges, there are no charges associated with that service. So there is no recovery of staff time.
Right, so now you're recovering the cost by putting this charge in. But the costs are different, because it's the staff cost, not the time.
So my understanding of what Rodney's just said was that the costs have been based on an average time taken per the tasks. So in terms of then the income associated with those, that the time taken is the same for both authorities. But obviously the income would change a bit coming back on a number of applications.
Yeah, but what I was saying was that the time taken by an officer, if you do the one task, and it's the same for South Norfolk or for Broadland, because the staff costs are different. There is a difference of 10% in the staff costs. Therefore, I would have expected that Broadland's fee would be 10% lower than South Norfolk's fee.
Need to clarify the point in terms of one team cost, the actual grades that each person are on, which is the same across both councils. Therefore, the 45, 50, 55 was actually to do with an entirely different situation. What you've got here is the cost of Broadland is not less per officer than the cost would be in South Norfolk per officer in terms of time, because they are both the same, they are paid on the same basis. And can you please clarify this, and with that sort of kind of clarity? And if that's wrong, if that's not the case, then say so.
So an officer gets the same amount of money per hour. It's just that they're spending 45% of their time working on Broadland work and 55% of their time on South Norfolk work.
That's costed out per
hour.
Kevin, did you want to?
I was just going to, I was just going to remind members the 45-55 split, the reason for the difference between the 45-55, I think that'd be an important point of clarity at this point in time. So the 45-55 split is based on the fact that South Norfolk has leisure in-house, has depot in-house, runs the CNC partnership for multiple authorities, and also has the internal audit consortium. So that's why the 45-55 split is different. But Rodney's absolutely right. The cost of a member of staff is exactly the same across both sites. So the work and the output that they are doing on an application or whatever it is they're working on is exactly the same, regardless of which council they're working for.
Right. So may I just carry on, just to clarify? When it comes to splitting the costs at the end of the financial year, planning department costs are split 45-55. That is correct, yes. So therefore the costs for work done within the planning department, the fees that we charge to recover those costs should also reflect the 45-55.
Yeah, and you see the confusion that this is causing, particularly when you look at planning, Emma. This is part of the problem with. I agree with you, by the way. I was actually, at the meeting back in 2017. We went through the basis for this. Myself, Andrew Proctor, etc. So I agree with you. However, now we've transitioned through. It's causing. We've transitioned through. And you're right about the leisure and the unequal balancing, all of that. Now you transition through into the one team department. This issue keeps on causing confusion because I know it's done on an hourly rate. However, the cost overall for planning split 45-55. Hence, you see the dilemma that this keeps causing. So.
I wonder if we could just clarify that the costs we're proposing to charge are based on the amount of staff time so we're just recovering our costs. Because one of the things I find confusing and possibly confusing to residents is that when we talk about, well, that's £34,000 revenue we could have had, it implies we're trying to make money out of it. And I would rather we can be clear that we are just charging what it costs the council to administer it. And secondly to that, of course, is presumably other councils are subsidising this because I see we are going to be way above everybody else in the substantial charges that we're putting. I have no problem with understanding the balance between the two, but those are my two questions.
As you say, it has been done based on time monitoring that admittedly was done some time ago, but it was based on the time taken and the task associated with that and looking to recover the costs associated with that. In terms of the nature of the service that we offer and the additionality that we give, again, without knowing the precise details of other services offered by other councils and the time they spend doing that. But in relation to this proposal, then that is the case, yes.
Okie dokie.
So we could be clear then that we're not making revenue out of this. I think that needs to be clear to residents that we're not making money out of this. We're just recovering the costs.
Well,
we're recovering the revenue costs to do that task.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Which is a completely reasonable premise, which I totally support, by the way. These developers that are making a profit out of these developments at the end of the day. I know that you got the other point about somebody who but Place Shaping actually didn't come up with that anyway, but thanks for letting us know that. The issue in terms of recovery of costs for us now, also time, absolutely right. 34,000, great in our account rather than it being sitting in a developer's account. The issue in terms of the one that you've raised, Grant, about the 45-55, I get frustrated about this because I know what it means, but there is actually confusion caused by when you look at the planning department, etc. And it keeps coming up, it keeps getting raised by different councillors, Conservative, Liberal, whatever, constantly. So just a conversation with Emma. So I'm going to task Emma to come back, have discussions with her team across the 5-star chamber, whatever it's called these days, and come back with a form of words that just really clarify this once and for all. We get it down and nutted down, and we get it clarified once and for all. It keeps on coming back, and you're raising some relevant points there, Grant. But it does keep on coming back. If we leave it there, not spending more time on it now because you won't be able to get there. But Emma can come back if you agree, Emma. We just discussed them. Come back with some form of words that finally kind of put all this to bed in an understandable manner. Okay. So,
just on that point, Chair, the two councils were charging the different rates originally because they were two different sizes, I understood. And So I'd like to see some transparency about the way the costs back to the councils will be verified, if you like, because if we've got less residents using a service because we're a smaller council,
No.
then
That's not
there's an
situation.
overhead and there's a fixed cost. And we need complete transparency on how they're being allocated, both on the revenue side, as the income side, as well as on the outgoing side.
Yeah,
It
it's
needs
not,
to be
it's-
transparent. We need to have this clarified.
Yeah, I've just actually done something, Sue. Your premise that you've just asked about is a wrong premise, by the way. It isn't to do with that was set up because there's less residents here in Broadland, etc., etc. That's not the reason why it was set up. Keep on trying to explain that, but there is complications when you look at this because it keeps coming back about when you look at the plan department. Therefore, if it's down an hourly rate, why is Broadland at the end of the year being settled up on this basis? So it does need to come back in some form of clarity for councillors once and for all, because we keep on getting hung up around it, and it just is confusing around it. So I think that would help us. So then we'll come back with some wording around that and see where we are then. But we can't get hung up on this anymore. Jan, I think you was next. No, I'm sorry, Grant, we've covered it.
Just a quick one, especially given that we've been talking about the two different councils. So on page 112, section 1. Paragraph 1.1, we're referring to South Norfolk Council there. I'm sure it should be broadened.
Chair, I can clarify that. As we were looking at a combined or common policy between, I have noticed there was that error in there. I think the proposal is that we refer just to the council for the avoidance of any confusion, rather than having two separate policies.
No, let me make something really clear here. We've got two sovereign councils, two sets of rates, two sets of residents paying different council tax. You're going to need to refer to Broadland in terms of policy. You can also make a reference South Norfolk as well, but you can't just say the council. We have not merged. You can only entitled to do that if we've merged. So can we just have clarity around that, please? So you're not going to do that, are you?
We will have two different policies then that are identical.
You just have to have the wording in there, right? Jen's point is right. It should say Broadlands.
Yes.
Even if you are charging the same amount, it's not the point. Right, so if there's nobody else, going to move on to the recommendation. Grant, it's not still on the 4555. Thank you.
No, thank you, Chairman. It's just to do with the recommendation, and I would like to propose that with this property name change, that where the developer is changing the name of the property, on a new build, for example, that fee be imposed. But where it is an existing property that has long been registered with a number and wants to change to a name, or an alias that they want to change to a number, that be exempt from that £63 fee. Other than that, I have no problem with the proposals. Thank you.
You're making a proposal for an amendment to that, are you?
That's correct,
Okay.
Chairman.
We'd need a seconder for that. Take the amendment first, and then whatever way that comes out, then have a vote on the recommendation. So is everybody prepared to second Grant? We'll just say the wording again, Grant. If you
Yes,
just
please.
take, people can't hear your mask on, Grant. Sorry about that.
Sorry, no, I didn't think it would be. No, it's just that that there's an exemption for an existing property that wishes to change its name or number.
Okay. Right. So, Jan, did you second that? Was that another point?
No, I'll second that.
Okay. Okay. So you understand the amendment? Okay. Those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okie dokie. Those against?
1, 2, 3. So that's
Abstaining?
five. Any
Abstaining?
abstentions?
Okie dokie. So 5 carries. Right. So that's the amendment. So now we'll move the main recommendation amended.
As amended.
As amended. So all those in favour of the recommendation, please show.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Any against? 2.
2.
Brilliant. Okie dokie. Right.
Then, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you very much, by the way. And you'll come back. I don't know how you're going to come back on that, Emma, whether it's to us at our next meeting or some other meeting, but
I will probably send something around to all councillors, Chairman, to be honest, but I'll share it with you first of all to make sure you're happy and I've provided the clarity. I will endeavour to do it this side of Christmas, but I'm not promising it'll probably be January.
okie dokie. And I think to all councillors, because I'm hearing outside the chamber all the time, complete confusion around this. It does happen all the time. It's not just here. So it would help. Right. So item 18, section 106 agreements monitoring fees. Yes, far away.
Thank you, Chair. So members will be aware from the report that in 2019 legislation was introduced which did allow authorities to recover their costs in relation to the monitoring of legal agreements associated with plan applications. Paragraph 3.2 on page 124 sets out the range of activities that are associated with the monitoring of those agreements. There's a range of options that could have been explored, and these are set out in the initial paragraphs of the report. And officers have considered those together with being proportionate and also taking account of the implications for different scales of developers. It's proposed, so in relation to legal agreements, there is the agreement itself, and within that there are obligations, and associated with each obligation are triggers. So, for example, an obligation would be in relation to the provision of open space or the payment of contributions in relation to providing for open space. The triggers would be the stages at which those payments were due. So in relation to larger developments, there's likely to be a number of triggers associated with the payments for open space, whereas in the smaller development, it's likely to be a single trigger. Council's currently monitoring 43 applications or 43 agreements, and within those there are 137 obligations, and associated with those are 667 triggers. So it gives us an idea of the scale of the monitoring that's currently taking place. As I say, in relation to the proposal, it's set out in paragraph 4.1 on page 124, and it's proposed that there's a sliding scale and that it's based on the obligation rather than the number of triggers associated with it. However, as just referenced, because the larger developments associated with each obligation are likely to have more triggers, then it is proposed that the cost associated with each obligation is therefore higher. In relation to those agreements, there's an example given in terms of average size developments and how many obligations are generally within those. So, for example, a development between a scale of 1 to 10 dwellings, there are normally on average 2 obligations within that. Whereas for larger developments, 11 to 50, there's generally 3 obligations, etc. And on that basis, it gives an indication of the likely charge that would be associated with those. Should highlight that generally, it's only scales of developments of 5 or more that start to generate the need for off-site contributions in relation to open space. So for a lot of those smaller sites, that wouldn't kick in until the development is 5 properties. The recommendation is to introduce the scale of charges as set out in the report.
Grant.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a quick question to Stuart. At the policy development panel meeting, this item was voted down. Our question to you is, what have you changed in what went to the place shaping panel to what is now being presented to the Cabinet, if any?
The report is represented because while it was voted down, an alternative was not put forward. There was no alternate recommendation, as I understand it.
Could we just have some clarity then? What was the recommendation that was agreed by the place shape, and was it just none? Really? The place shaping committee took the position that it would not recommend anything.
That's correct. I mean, James can confirm that. That is in your minutes, I think, on your papers going to Cabinet. They didn't, the recommendation was lost. I think it was 3-2 from recollection, or it was lost, but there was an alternative recommendation put forward by the panel. So we are presenting the original recommendation by officers.
So I'm just clarifying. So effectively, then the place shaping by 3-2, by not making an alternative recommendation, are actually saying they don't believe that that this should be actually happening. They period on the recommendation, just leave it as it is. Would that be a fair appraisal? Just trying to clarify what's happened there. I mean, anybody else on place shaping apart from Grant? You know?
I think, I can add in, Chair. I think there was discussions about supporting the principle of charging for monitoring. There was discussions about what it could or couldn't be, but there was no alternative recommendation put forward.
Right.
I think you would have to ask the chairman of the committee to kind of sum that up for you.
Chairman of the committee, who is that? Well, he's not here, is he? So that can't do that here. Nigel, any light on the matter? Nigel, if you're on place shaping as well.
Chair, can I?
Okay.
Can I assist? I think so. So what you have before you are two items on this. Obviously, you've got the minutes and the place shaping panel, which sum up the discussion. Looking back on those, it wasn't a unanimous decision. Well, it was a decision, but it wasn't a unanimous decision to turn that down. Which Helen has explained. So therefore, you've got the report as stands in front of you, but alongside that, you've got the minutes to consider, which is exactly what Cabinet will do next Tuesday. They'll consider the minutes from the place shaping panel alongside the report that you've got in front of you from officers and determine the best way forward.
Yeah. Just trying to get some clarity on why, because we are trying to also take on board some consideration from these panels, right, as I like to call them, committees. Yes, so.
Sorry, can I just clarify again? These are things that are going to be costs apportioned to developers for their. Yeah, we seem to be putting a lot of cost on developers. That's all I'm asking. It's a developer's cost based on us recovering the costs for us to do the work to get their development underway. Yes?
Yes, this is seeking to recover the cost of, so once planning permission is granted, that's subject to an associated legal agreement, and it's the cost associated with the monitoring of that agreement and the collection of that money or compliance with those clauses associated with the development.
Okay, so I'll take the end as the last one, then we move to recommendations. Far away, yeah.
Yeah, hopefully a quick one. So on page 123, para 2.4, I get the point about authorities can charge a monitoring fee to cover the cost of monitoring and reporting on delivery of the Section 106 obligation, but then it goes on to say it further outlines that monitoring fees can be used to monitor any type of planning obligation for the lifetime of that obligation. Can you just kind of clarify then? We're using Section 106 funding to monitor any type of planning requirement, conditions, and so on.
This proposal is purely in relation to the legal agreements for the consideration of the monitoring of the clauses within those agreements.
Discuss that later. Thanks.
Okay. So excuse me. Move forward to the recommendation, and obviously there's no recommendation from the place shaping panel, so it's pretty hard to take that on board at the moment. Yeah, again, just for expediency here. So we've got 1, 2, and 3. I'll propose. Any seconder? We're on
No, there's
page.
only one, it's on 127.
Sorry, I've lost myself now. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. Monitoring fees for section 106 set out in appendix 1, adopted from 1st of April 2022. So seconded. All those in favour? 1, 2,
3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
7 against. 1,
That's carried.
2. Okay, carried. Right. Thank you. So forward plan, page 122. Who's speaking to this?
That's just a note, Chairman. That's Cabinet's forward plan. So I wouldn't suggest any topic unless anyone's got anything they want to raise.
Okay. Anyone want any clarification on the this forward plan? No. Okie dokie. All right, so we'll note that, yeah. Agreed, note. Yes, yeah. And then I'm going to move item 20, exclusion of the press and public, which I'll do. You right, Ken? Do you need any help? You're right. So item 20, exclusion of press and public. I move that the press and public be excluded from the meeting, remainder of items of business, because otherwise information which is exempt information by virtue of paragraphs 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as amended by the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order of 2006, would be disclosed to them. I so move. Agreed.